A woman, no one knew that when her name was whispered, thousands would die. A city, proud of its walls, believing itself to be invincible, a city that had stood for centuries. And a decision was made in silence. No one noticed, but in that moment, history changed. Because some wars do not begin with swords, they begin with a glance, with a choice, with a desire. And that day, no one understood. But one woman set a city on fire. But this did not happen in an instant. Everything had begun long before. Her name, Helen, she was told to be the most beautiful woman in the world. But beauty is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a curse. Everyone wanted her. Kings, warriors, heroes. And in the end, a king prevailed. The king of Sparta, Menelaus. Helen married him, but this was not just a marriage. This was a vow, an alliance, an order, and that order was broken. One day, another man arrived, the prince of Troy, Paris. But he was not alone. His brother was with him, Hector. A warrior, a protector, and Troy's strongest shield. Paris was a choice, but Hector was the price of that choice. Paris looked at Helen, and in that moment, everything changed. But Hector knew that moment could destroy a city. Was it love, or a mistake? No one knows. But there is one thing we know. Helen left, or was taken. But the outcome did not change. A king was humiliated. An honor was trampled. And this started a war. Old oaths were remembered. Whoever took Helen, they would protect him. And in that moment, the promises once made turned into war. This was not just a king's war. This was the price of promises kept. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae. But that day, he was not just a king, he was the leader of all armies. This war was no longer just a matter of honor, it had become a display of power. Achilles, a warrior, but not an ordinary one. His name meant fear. Where he arrived, the war was already considered over. His story was not about power, it was about choice. He was given a fate, a long life, but to be forgotten, or a short life, but to be remembered forever. And he chose death. Because some people are not born to live, but to leave a mark. The ships were launched into the sea, and Troy became the target. Its walls rose into the sky, its gates were believed to be unbreakable. And inside, life went on. At dawn, the markets were set. Merchants shouted, women carried water. Children ran through the stone streets. Everything seemed normal. But Troy was not just living, it was preparing, because everyone could feel what was coming, but no one could name it. Men were learning to fight. Women were not just waiting, they were holding life together. And when evening came, the city slowly grew quiet. The day's work ended, people returned to their homes. Fires were lit, food was prepared, bread, wine, sometimes meat. Families sat together. They spoke of how the day had passed. Some remained silent, because everyone was thinking the same thing: war. Beyond the walls, no one truly knew what was there, but they could feel it was getting closer. The waiting would not last long. For 10 years, they fought. Blood soaked into the earth. Hector defended the city, his family, his honor. But after a while, something changed. The greatest warrior withdrew, Achilles. He was invincible, but that day, he chose to leave the war. During the war, Achilles takes a captive woman, right-pointing arrow Briseis. She is considered his prize. But then, Agamemnon takes the woman from him by force. In that time, this was not just about a woman. It was about honor, respect, Power, which meant, Agamemnon was saying, "You may be powerful, but I am above you." Agamemnon, that day, made a mistake. He took away Achilles' honor. And this did not weaken a warrior, but an entire army. Because for some, honor matters more than victory. Achilles withdrew, and the war continued without him. The balance was broken. That's why, that day, someone else stepped forward. Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend. He wore Achilles' armor, and entered the war. But this was not a game, because he faced the wrong man, Hector, the protector of Troy. He stopped him, and killed him, but in that moment, he did not know who he had killed. And in that moment, everything changed. The news spread, Achilles learned. And that day, the war returned. But this was not the same war. This was revenge. Achilles wanted only one thing. Hector, before the city gates, they faced each other. This time, there was no escape. This was a true duel. Achilles wanted to be immortal. And Helen watched it all, as a city burned in her name. But the truth is, no war is ever fought for just one person. Troy could not be brought down. Its walls were too strong. But then, an idea was born. Not a sword, not an army, a game. A giant horse, silent, motionless, seemingly innocent, but inside there was death. The enemy pretended to leave. The ships disappeared. And the people of Troy believed it. They thought they had won. The horse was brought into the city. Night was silent, but that silence was the omen of the end. They came out like shadows. The gates were opened from within, and Troy began its own end. Fire consumed the sky. Screams echoed against the stone walls. People ran, but there was nowhere left to escape. That night, not just a city, but a history was lost. Menelaus found Helen, the cause of a war that lasted for years. It is said he wanted to kill her, but then he stopped, because sometimes a single glance is more powerful than a war. And Helen survived. She was taken back to Sparta, but behind her, she left a city in ashes. The story began with a woman and ended with her. So who was to blame? Helen, Paris, the kings? And sometimes, a single choice destroys thousands of lives. Axiom Earth continues to reveal the darkest truths of humanity. If you want to see the truth, subscribe. Because the next story will go even deeper.